your flagship station for the Beam Team, Sactown Sports.
Just saw a stat here. Tyrese Haliburton, when he has 20 points and 10 assists, the Pacers are 19-1. So people might think, all right, he just has to shoot more. But again, Drake, when he's 20 and 10, that means the offense is humming.
Yes,
it's
getting
not
others
just
involved.
him.
Right, others involved, others knocking down shots, 100%.
Nice enough to join us, and we'll get him on his way so we can enjoy the game. ESPN pro basketball writer Kevin Pelton. How are you today, Kevin?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I have to start with something non-basketball related. What TV show from your childhood do you miss the most, sir?
I guess I would go with Seinfeld.
Okay.
It's definitely finding pop culture thing for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's still there, of course. It's easy to find.
Yeah.
It's all over the place.
I wonder, is he a shrimp guy or not? Is he going to the jerk store or not? No. Hey, Kevin, thanks for jumping on with us, man. Obviously a lot to talk about. Let's start. I want to start with the NBA Finals here. And this narrative regarding Tyrese Haliburton, superstar or not, whatever. Where would you say Tyrese is in his career right now?
It's an interesting thought because with great success comes great responsibility, and the shots that he's made and this run that he's led the Pacers onto the finals, it's also increased scrutiny. And, I think that's a tough thing about when every game sort of becomes a referendum on your level of stardom. Superstardom, to me, that's only a handful of players in the league that's reserved for. I don't think Haliburton is quite to that level, but star without question. And I don't think that should be changed based off, the first couple of games of the finals, especially because it shouldn't surprise us that he's going to be a tough time offensively. This is the team that he's scored the least against the last 2 seasons. Against Dort is the defender who he scored the least in individual matchups, who he's faced, at a high rate over the last 2 seasons. This Oklahoma City team in many ways is built to stop players like Tyrese Haliburton. So it's not to be terribly surprising that he's had a hard time getting going in this series.
That's Kevin Pelton, the ESPN pro basketball writer. Kevin, I know you posted about this. I wanted to ask you, can you give us 1 or 2 lessons maybe that the Kings can learn from the way OKC and the Pacers put their teams together?
Yeah, I think, probably the biggest one has to be patience. And that's been an issue for Sacramento. When you have the kind of drought that they had for a number of years, trying to end that becomes the focus as opposed to, having your eyes on building something that's, more sustainable or has a higher ceiling. And obviously, Indiana's side of the Tyrese Haliburton trade was that, but Oklahoma City has kind of been a masterclass in patience in the way that they, collected draft picks, collected young talent, and allowed it to grow very quickly over a period of time. And now they are starting to reap the benefits of that.
Kevin Pelton joining us. You go check him out on Blue Sky. K Pelton, Blue Sky of Social. Kevin, when I look at the Kings roster, it's a little unbalanced, if you will. No point guard. You got a couple of big contracts and Zach and DeMontis Sabonis. We got a new GM out here in Scott Perry. How difficult do you think this job is for him to try and turn Sacramento, the Kings, into a contender out west?
I think to your point, it's kind of roster in transition right now because, I think they did a reasonable job with the De'Aaron Fox trade of staying in position to be competitive and play for, a spot in the playoffs, in the play-in after that trade, as well as picking up the draft picks that they did accumulate in that deal. But, it did leave them a little overbalanced on the wing, not quite enough playmaking as you'd want. I think that shouldn't be terribly difficult to resolve in the short term. In the long term, it's the biggest issue is who can be that star player who is going to be, the guy who's carrying us in playoff series, because as terrific as DeMontis Sabonis was, and you could probably say this about De'Aaron Fox before the trade, those are guys who are better complementing another star who's even better than them, more than they are, going to be the guys who are going to be the focal point of a team that goes deep in the playoffs. And, Sacramento just has to find that guy, and it's a very difficult thing to do if you don't bottom out in the lottery.
Kevin Pelton with us from ESPN. We know that Scott Perry has said, we don't have a true point guard. It appears that that's one of the things he's focusing on. We'll find out. But, Kevin, my question is, if you were running the Kings or involved in running the Kings, which, if any, of the free agent point guards would you be focusing on right now?
Well, I certainly want to give a call to Chris Paul. It's a short flight away from his home in L.A.
Yep.
It's a situation where he'd probably have a chance to play quite a bit. That's clearly been important to him. It doesn't seem like San Antonio is going to be that spot with De'Aaron Fox, and the presumption that if they hang on to the number 2 pick and don't use it in the trade, that they'll probably add Dylan Harper and also have Stephon Castle in the mix. Is a lot of ball handlers down there. Tyus Jones would be someone else who's interesting to me. It was kind of disappointing his season in Phoenix. I don't think he rebuilt his value for free agency the way that he was hoping, but this is one of the most sure-handed point guards in the league, and somebody's going to come in and really know his role, and I think fit well alongside the talent that the Kings do have on the way.
Kevin Pelton joining us. Hey, Kevin, it seems like this time, and I know we got the NBA Finals going on, but it seems like there's this anticipation for trade season to start. How soon do you think we'll start seeing things, and how much of a flurry activity will there be this offseason?
I think a lot of it will probably depend on the Kevin Durant trade because, clearly based on the reporting that's out there today, there have been multiple teams that are looking at this possibility. Is, you have to, when a player of Kevin Durant's talent is available even at this stage of his career. And, he's only going to end up going to one team. There's going to be these other teams that are to be out there and, have considered a trade, maybe thought about making their players available, and, what they end up pivoting to will be interesting to see. I think the other question that helps determine, kind of how active this trade market is going to be is, are people waiting around to see if Giannis Antetokounmpo potentially requests a trade from the Milwaukee Bucks? Because, clearly he would be the number 1 target if he were to come on the market after, however many All-NBA seasons, first-team seasons in a row, former 2-time MVP, et cetera. If teams have a realistic expectation that it could happen at some point this offseason, then maybe you hold some of that powder in reserve just in case. If not, then I think that there's maybe a little bit more activity with teams trying to figure out what else they can do to upgrade their rosters.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you about another thing you wrote about, the Pacers, as we get ready for Game 3 here. Where do they rank among the most surprising finalists in NBA history?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time using the sportsoddhistory.com database and looking at preseason expectations and then going into the playoffs. And, the one team I think that seems like a bigger surprise in terms of making the finals since the ABA-NBA merger, if you go back almost 5 decades, would be the 1981 Rockets. Did it after a season where they went 40-42 and were 500 the year before. So, Indiana clearly was a better bet than that after reaching the Eastern Conference Finals a year ago. But in an East where you had these 261 juggernauts in the Boston Celtics and Cleveland Cavaliers, one of whom the Celtics had swept them in the playoffs a year ago, it was pretty surprising, and I think it has been an incredible run to watch with the Pacers, highlighted by all these comebacks.
Hey, Kevin, my co-host asked you about anything the Kings can take from these two teams. With that being said, when you look at two teams under the luxury tax, not superstar laden, not 3 or 4 stars or 2 or 3 stars. Is this a new era of actual team building in the NBA, you think?
I do think there's an element of that. Now, what makes the Thunder so special and gives them a chance to not only win the championship this year, but, maybe run off a few of them over the next few years is they haven't had to choose. They have the MVP in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, plus probably the deepest team in the league. And, that's the luxury they've been afforded going back to the Paul George trade and, all the draft picks that they've had and how shrewdly Sam Presti has managed them. But, I think Indiana is maybe a better template in terms of, this is a team that wants to play 9 guys every night throughout the course of the playoff season, even as other coaches, Tom Thibodeau notably, but he's not alone, are really shortening their rotation. They have a couple of, 30% max type players in Haliburton and Siakam, but, not anyone making that much more beyond that, which allows you to facilitate the depth. And then the youth, I do think, is a big factor. You look at a lot of these star-laden teams with veterans that we spend so much time talking about, they aren't here because of the fact that those guys haven't been able to keep it up over, the grueling NBA playoffs, and they haven't had the depth to support this guy. So I do think that is a little bit different model going forward.
Follow him on Blue Sky, Kevin Pelton. Kevin, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. We hope to talk to you again soon. Enjoy the game.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right, Kevin.
Very welcome. Speaking of games, Whitey's Wayback Machine quiz. Kyle Draper, I believe you're defending a championship today.
There's no doubt about that. 100% I'm the champ. That's right. No, damn Skippy, I'm the champ. Let's get it right.
If he can successfully defend. Next on Sactown Sports.
Louis C.K. in an all-new show, Ridiculous 2025 Tour.
When I was younger, you had to go